It's time for love. It's time for your love coach. Let's find out if you're ready for love. Here's your marvelous host, Nikki Lee.
Hello, and welcome to Ready for Love Radio. This is your host and love coach, Nikki Lee. Now, today we are going to talk about a topic that I have wanted to discuss ever since the first time I saw the title of this book. A while back, I had Diane Dreher on the show with me, and she came on the show, but at that time, I said, you know what, I'm going to have her back, and when I do, we're going to talk about a book that she has that's titled Your Personal Renaissance, 12 Powerful Practices for Finding Your Life's Calling. I mean, absolutely any time is a great time to talk about finding your life's calling. But it's always a good time to just kind of take a look at things and see if there's a way that, you know, maybe you could be a little happier, or maybe it's time to reevaluate and just see what you can do and see if you're doing what you should be with your life. So, Diane, I cannot wait to get into this topic with you.
Great. And I feel the same way.
Like I said, the first time I looked through your list of books, I'm like, I love this topic. But I'm really happy to have you back. So, what prompted you to write this book?
Oh, well, I teach at Santa Clara University, and years ago I was teaching this class about literature. We were looking at a poem by John Milton who was talking about trying to find his calling. So I asked my students, well, how would you discuss your calling today? How would you describe it? And they looked at me with just blank stares. And I said, well, what do you want to do with your life? And they said, well, and I said, why are you going to college? And they finally said, well, so I can have money to buy a new car, or so I can live as well as my parents, or whatever. And I said, don't you have, a deeper meaning for what you do than just paying the bills? And I thought, oh my gosh, my students really need to get a sense that, of course, we need to pay the bills. Of course, we need to eat and, exercise and sleep and take care of our physical needs. But we have a lot more metaphysical, emotional, spiritual, whatever. Maslow called them self-actualizing needs. We need to feel like we're doing something that makes sense to us, that's meaningful. It gives us a sense of joy. So I decided I needed to write this book.
Well, it's life is so much more fulfilling when you feel like you're accomplishing something and you have a purpose. I mean, I know it sounds kind of corny to some people, but those are the people that need a purpose more than anybody,
Mm-hmm. There are lots of studies that have come out lately that really show that we've got something like a crisis of meaning and purpose in our country.
Totally.
There's a 30% rise in depression and a 28% rise in suicides here in the United States since the 1990s. And,
right.
Wow, according to Gallup research, 85% of workers worldwide, are disengaged or not actively engaged in their work. So they just do it to pay the bills. They don't do it they don't find any meaning there. And that's really sad because most people spend most of their working hours, their waking hours at work. And if they're spending all this time doing something that doesn't mean anything to them, they're not going to be very happy.
Right. Well, that's kind of like the whole working for the weekend mentality. You work all week to get to the weekend to party, and then Monday morning you start all over again. And you're not really doing anything with your life. That's like we were talking too about having the mentality that you don't really want to learn and grow and learn new things. I can't even imagine. I know a lot of people like that. And I can't even wrap my mind around not wanting to learn new things. I joke that I want to learn too much, and I need to kind of like suppress that sometimes to make it manageable.
Yeah, but it sounds like, according to research, and we can talk about that later, we all have certain strengths, certain qualities that can be measured, and that some of us really have a real zest for learning.
Right.
Some of us have really strong sense of wanting to help other people.
Right.
Some people love nature, some people love animals, some people love to dance, to move, to create art. We human beings have a vast variety of potentials that we individually don't realize. And
right.
Yet, when we do connect with something that we deeply love to do, we feel totally energized. And our immune systems work better. We stay healthier.
Exactly. Well, it's funny because when I was in school, in even elementary school, I always wanted to be a teacher. That was my big thing I wanted to do. I had a teacher in second grade that I absolutely loved, and I just connected with her immediately, and it was really cool because then in seventh grade she actually moved to be a seventh grade teacher by the time I got there, so I got to have her as my teacher again. And then when my first book was published, I tracked her down so I could call and tell her the day that they were delivered, that I was published. And and then it was really cool because when I found her, when I told her that they had just come in, I was actually holding my first published book in my hand, and her first words to me were, I knew you would do it. I didn't know when, but I knew you would. So she's been an inspiration to me for decades. So it's just, I always wanted to be a teacher in some way. And so being a coach and through my writing and this sort of thing, I've kind of gotten a chance to do that, not in the traditional way I thought I would, but the internet and radio and that sort of thing has given me an opportunity to do that in other ways, and through the Love Yourself program that I've developed and other sorts of things, So it's interesting how what we may have seen ourselves doing at, say, 7, 8, 9, or 10 years old, how that can change through technology and our creativity and that sort of thing over the years. So our quote-unquote calling can manifest itself in different ways as we kind of, research and get more out of the box over the years.
Yeah, and a couple of things. Your teacher must have found her calling and, just absolutely projected her love of learning. And you caught it, and connected with you. And the fact that she was, first grade teacher, and then she became a seventh grade teacher, she was committed to her own learning and growth.
Right.
A great example. I think that I totally agree with what you say, because I'm also a writer, and I write blogs now, and when I was in school, I had no idea that I was going to be writing blog posts because they didn't have them then.
Right.
Although underneath it all, you and I are still using some of the same strengths that we discovered in childhood, love of learning. We're just finding different ways to manifest those strengths.
Exactly.
Because,
Well, and even like with my writing style, it's very much a speaking to the person and instructing them in a lot of cases. Because a lot of my things are done in a handbook and workbook kind of style, so it's instructional. So it's interesting how these things manifest. So like I said, it may not be the way we originally envisioned them. I like things that we do that get out of the box. So it's, just kind of open your mind and just kind of, I like the free flow of ideas and like I said, just kind of open your mind. You just never know what you might find,
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it really does help for people to go back and think about, especially if they're feeling, just blah, right?
Right.
What did I really love to do when I was a child?
Right.
And, my husband used he grew up in Brooklyn in the housing projects, but what he loved was nature, and he also loved to go watch the horses around Central Park. So now he has a horse. He's out with his horse right now. He's also a psychology professor, so for his day job. But the fact is, he's managed to find a way to bring his love of nature and horses into his daily life, and it makes him happy. We don't have to find our calling necessarily in the work we do, although that's really convenient. Sometimes people find it in their hobbies, their avocations, the things they do for their own pleasure. But we need to find something that lights up our lives.
Right. Well, and you never know. He might decide he wants to blog about horses in the evening.
That could be. And there are people that do therapy with horses. Mm-hmm. Equine therapy, they call it. So maybe he can combine these things. I don't know. Again, it takes ingenuity, but we need to kind of, first of all, I think, go within and say, what do I really love to do?
Right.
And that's part of loving ourselves and loving our own possibilities.
Yes. Well, and realizing we have possibilities and then starting to dig. And the thing is, you've got to love yourself enough to put the effort into doing this. It's got to be the first step, right?
You bet. And a lot of people are too busy. I'm sure you've noticed this in your programs. They're too busy pleasing others and living a life of shoulds.
Right. Right.
So, or else they're too busy, and they just fill up their calendars with all kinds of things that they have to do. And they're exhausted at the end of the day, and they've done a lot of things, but they aren't very energized because a lot of these things are just chores.
Right.
So we schedule ourselves for how and when, but often we don't stop and ask ourselves, why am I doing these things? Do I really care about them? Do these things energize me? Do these activities, do these relationships really bring me joy, energy, meaning? And if not, maybe we need to do something different.
So what for the listeners, what is a life of should?
What is a life of should? Okay.
Yes.
It's letting other people determine what's important for us and tell us, oh, you should. A lot of my students have their parents tell them, you should major in accounting so that you can get a good job. And the student maybe wants to be an artist or a writer or something else. But being dominated by other people's shoulds makes us into a kind of a robot. We aren't listening to our hearts. Some people tell us, especially in family situations, you should enjoy this whatever family gathering, and maybe they don't, or you should say thank you for a gift and wear it, even though it's a color you detest.
Right.
It's going against the grain of who we are, and they're little shoulds and big shoulds. But I think the one story that I find amazing is Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist. He's Brazilian writer of bestsellers. When he was growing up, his parents told him, you should become a lawyer. And he said, I want to be a writer. And they said, no, you can never make a success as a writer. You should be a lawyer. And when he protested, they had him locked up in a mental institution and subjected to electrical shock therapy to try to shock him into being the person that they wanted him to be. He finally relented and was released, went to law school, hated it, dropped out, started traveling around the world, wrote The Alchemist, which became a bestseller. They were trying to impose their idea of what he needed to be, and he was trying to live from his heart. And I'm grateful that he did, because The Alchemist is a very interesting book, and it's inspired a lot of my students.
Interesting story. I wanted to be a writer from about second grade, same teacher. And I was not encouraged by any of my family members to be a writer for some of the same reasons. Couldn't be a writer, not a good idea. Of course not, don't do that. And they actually didn't get on board with that until after I was published, and all their friends were fascinated that I was a writer. Once their friends were, then they were excited. They're like, oh, no, okay, maybe there's something to this. So 35 books published later, now they're excited about the fact that I'm a writer. But they're excited about it now, so.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. Their friends, were saying, oh, you should be so proud of your daughter. And
exactly, at that point. Well, and when I was doing local events and doing authors, book signings, and when I was on book TV, then they were excited, and they were in the audience. Oh, we're the parents, So my brother still doesn't get it, but at least mom and dad were enjoying it. Well, and the thing is too, if you want to be a writer, people immediately think you want to write the great American novel, which, the chance of making a fortune with that, okay, come on, let's be honest, that's kind of slim to none. Okay, but there now, in this day and time, there's a whole lot of ways you can get into writing and make money. So, that's not as difficult now as it used to be, because, I was a freelance writer for years and made a living at it. So there's ways to get into writing now if you're willing to be flexible with how you get into it. So, there are different ways to do that now. So,
and it's the same kind of thing. If you have this calling, right, if you have this love of writing, there are lots of different ways to express that, to channel that. And
like I said, you got to be flexible.
Not just got to write a novel. That would be a pretty limited way to do it. But our culture doesn't really give people those cues very often. I'm glad you do.
Well, that's what. Well, I was actually just talking to somebody earlier today who says, "Oh, I wish I could be a professional writer." And I said, "Well, no, let me just kind of give you a little bit of insight into that. What that means. It's not all glamour, by far."
Yeah.
Well, and I told him, I said when I first started doing it, now because I was a freelance writer for 3 or 4 years, and that's what I did full time. I said, but what that entailed was I was given like a 1-page description of a book, and I had to start to finish. I had to finish a book in 3 months, and this is somebody that's been working on one book for like 20 years. I said, so just to give you an idea. So
it can be challenging, and I think there are a lot of people that maybe they watched a lot of fairy tale movies when they were growing up or something.
Right.
They think that I'm just going to sit down and I will magically write this novel, which will then become successful, and I'll live happily ever after. And, Jiminy Cricket is going to help me, and, whatever. Or
I'll get a fancy check, and I'll just take my time and spend the next 5 years writing this book, and I'll get a great big check for, and that's not how this works.
No, it's not magic. It's reality. The magic is, I think, if there is magic involved, is feeling energized and inspired and filled with joy with what we're doing. Got to put the action into it.
Right.
Moving forward.
Well, and that's the whole bottom line. That's what happens. That magic and the inspiration and that energizing is what happens when you figure out your calling. When you figure out what motivates you and what you're passionate about, that's all those things happen for you. Like I said, it's going to sound corny to people that haven't found it yet, but it happens. It really does. So what is a personal renaissance for people that don't understand it? What is it?
Okay, a personal renaissance is a time when we look at our lives and we declare our independence. We're coming up to the 4th of July fairly, soon, obviously. We declare our independence from shoulds and decide that we're in charge of our lives, our time, and our choices. And according to a lot of research in positive psychology, realizing that we have a choice is vital to our health and tremendously empowering. So, instead of saying, okay, I've got to do all these things, people that may have these expectations of me, to really stop and say, what really inspires and energizes me? And I'm going to do that. I'm going to follow that path and find what really makes my life worthwhile. And it's going to be a journey of discovery and excitement, some challenges, but people are going to live with a lot more vitality and a lot a lot greater sense of energy and even stronger immune systems when they do that.
Okay, now, people are going to get mad at me about this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is this something that we can have somebody else do for us, or do we have to do it ourselves?
What a great question. No one can find our calling for us. It's a spiritual exercise. It's like hiring somebody to go to the gym and lift weights for me. It does not make my muscles stronger. It helps the person. It requires, it's a commitment. And it's a commitment to living in uncertainty and to exploring and discovering and following that light of what brings us joy and meaning. So no one else can do that for us. Although I have a lot of students whose parents think they can do that for their sons and daughters. That is not the case.
But you see why I prefaced it that way, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, Paulo Coelho's parents thought they were doing a good thing to him, too. I mean, my gosh. Lock him up if he doesn't want to do what he should do. Yeah, sure. No one can find our calling. It's a discovery of our own unique gifts.
Well, and like you're saying, somebody else can try to find it for you, but the thing is, it's very personal. We have to find it, and like the title says, your personal renaissance. We have to put forth the effort to find it for ourselves, and honestly, it's like I've already said, we have to care enough about ourselves to put the effort in to find it for ourselves. We've got to care. Yeah, it is absolutely a demonstration of self-care and of the fact that we believe our lives have value, not value that other people, put upon us or externals, but we have an intrinsic value. In the Renaissance, historically, back when Shakespeare lived, right.
Incidentally, Shakespeare's father was a glove maker, and his parents were both illiterate. They signed their names with an X. Shakespeare obviously had a different path. He discovered his gifts and shared them with the world. But back then, a personal renaissance, a sense of calling was part of our personal identity. Just like, if you have blue eyes or brown eyes, you're this tall, or whatever your hair color, your identity was also your calling.
Right.
And when people grew up, they were supposed to discover their gifts. They believed that God gave everybody a certain number of gifts, and it was our duty and our destiny to develop them and share them with the world. And not everybody had parents that supported them even then. Michelangelo's father wanted him to be a cloth maker and would beat him whenever he found his son drawing because he thought that was a waste of his time. And fortunately for the artistic world, Michelangelo prevailed because he had such a strong sense of who he was. I feel called to do this. I have to do this. This is who I am. So, our calling is part of our identity, and no one can declare that for us.
There are times, there's too many times, where the people closest to us may not recognize and appreciate what we know in our heart is our calling. Because what I'm doing with this show and with a lot of my writing, I feel is my calling, and I can't not do it. But a lot of my family don't get it and actually resent it, but I don't care. That's their problem as far as I'm concerned. It's something I have to do. I have to do it for me because of what I learned and how much I've grown with this show and with what I can share with other people through the show. And it's like they don't get it, and that's just going to have to be their problem. They can either deal with it or they cannot, and I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm not comparing myself to Michelangelo by any chance, but by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm just sharing that with the listeners because if you do the work and you find something you feel is your calling, and the people closest to you in your life don't get it, that's their problem. Pursue it if you're passionate about it and you get fulfillment from it and it energizes you, go with it. Do what you need to do. as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. Now, if it hurts somebody, that's a whole other ballgame.
Well, exactly. I mean, we're not talking, if people get a sense of passion and fulfillment from committing crimes, that's probably
that's
not
different. That's different.
And way back in the Renaissance, that was not a legitimate calling. They had things that they ruled out. No, you're not supposed to do these things. This is not part of it. But exactly what you said about I can't not do it. That's who I am. That's essential to finding a calling.
Exactly. How can a person take the first steps to find their calling? So I think sometimes our calling finds us, which is kind of what happened with me with this.
Okay. Well, let me go through step one, and then I have a question for you. I've worked out this calling protocol with my colleague Tom Plant, who's a health psychologist. And he uses this in clinical practice to help people who are suffering from depression, anxiety, chronic stress, low self-worth. And the protocol has 4 Ds, which are described in my book: discovery, detachment, discernment, and direction. The first D is discovery.
Okay.
It's discovering our strengths. It's recognizing what we love to do, what brings us joy and energy.
Okay.
And anybody can kind of do that. You are doing something and you feel energized afterward. That's a good sign.
Yeah, definitely.
Something else, and it's a big drain, and instead of feeling a sense of accomplishment and energy, all you feel is relief, like, oh, I'm glad that's over. That's obviously not your calling.
Well, and we need to be aware. I mentioned on here a lot of being aware of ourselves, and I talk about that with our partners too. Be aware of your partner and how they're reacting to things around them too. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's also something called strength spotting that we can help each other discover our strengths.
Right. That's cool. I like that.
Notice when somebody does something really well and seems to be, energized, you can say, wow, you have a real strength for public speaking, for example, or, and the person will say, oh, yeah, or you're really good at reaching out and helping others. And the person, because it helps to have people who mirror back to us who we really are.
Right. Well, and sometimes we're going to notice a strength in a person they may not notice in themselves. So it's very helpful when we can do that for each other. Yeah,
because a lot of times we can't see ourselves, actually, unless we look in a mirror, unless we have a reflection back to us. And sometimes the things we do well are so obvious to us that we figure, oh, that's nothing. That's so easy,
Right.
It just comes naturally to me, so it's no big deal. Well, according to some of our friends, it may indeed be a big deal.
Right. Very true.
Yeah, so my question for you is, how did you discover yours?
I think, well, with this whole coaching thing and with all that, I think it was because I saw such a change in myself. I saw such a positive change in myself, and it was, and actually my mother pointed it out to me. So that with other people being aware of changing ourselves. So she saw such a positive change in me, and she didn't know what was going on or why it was such a change, but she saw that, and then that triggered me, and I started paying closer attention, and so actually it was my mom.
Oh, that's wonderful. So she actually helped with strength spotting.
Exactly.
She was a mirror. We need to do that for each other a lot more. That would be a wonderful public service, and it doesn't cost anything to just recognize when somebody is, really doing something that has a positive effect on them and others, to just point it out. We get enough bad news lately, we need good news.
Exactly.
We need positivity. So the first step in finding a calling then is discovery, and how other people can help us, and how we can recognize what we love to do as children, who we admire, Sometimes that's a key. And what we love to do, what makes us feel happy and energized. Then the second D is detachment, because we need to have time to do what we value and what is meaningful. And a lot of us are have our lives filled with distractions and external demands that take us away from these things.
No doubt.
So, yeah, to recognize distractions, recognize what drains us, and whenever possible, cut down or eliminate those things to make space for the things that do matter.
Right.
In addition, again, we have a very, very busy culture. Some people schedule a weekly Sabbath when they unplug and reflect and don't always turn on the news and turn on their phones and, tablets and whatever. Some people have a contemplative practice. They meditate on a regular basis. And another thing that we can do, which is a real challenge in our world, is to stop rushing.
Right. Very true.
Because when we rush around, it sends a message to our brains that we're stressed, and we get into the fight or flight, and our whole attention narrows. We can't think creatively when we're running around in a big hurry, and we don't notice things. We just,
right.
We just get fixated on getting whatever it is done, or making it across town in traffic or something like that. And actually stress shuts down our immune systems and messes with our digestive systems. So, it takes, especially since our whole world is moving so fast, it takes real discipline to just take a deep breath and slow down and be present. But when we are present, we get a lot more insight into our callings and into our lives.
It's interesting you say that about not being creative when we're rushing. I get my best creative ideas when I'm on the road, just on the interstate, just wide open spaces, windows down, just on the road.
That's beautiful, because you're in the zone and you're doing something that doesn't tax your brain, so that you have open space to really, to think creatively. Yeah. I do that too, and I was driving to school one day and got this idea for a poem, and I actually had to pull off to the side of the road and write it down. So
you know what I do? I use the record feature on my phone.
Well, that was before I had one of these phones. But yes, a lot of people get inspired ideas when they're in that state. Einstein used to get a lot of his insights when he was out sailing.
Yeah.
He kept a little notebook in his pocket so he could write down his brilliant ideas and then go back. That's part of the creative process, actually, it's called incubation. There are 4 stages.
I used to when I used to go tanning in the tanning beds. I'd relax in the heat, in the tanning, and it was so funny because I finally got smart, and I'd take like a notepad with me into the tanning bed. She always laughed when I did, but I used to come running out of there, piece of paper and a pen, because I'd always have an idea, and I'd come to the front, and I knew the people that owned the place, thank goodness, but I'd always have to jot something down real quick because I'd have like a new title for something I was working on or something, and she'd just laugh at me every time.
Yes, that's it.
But yeah, after 20 minutes in there with the warmth and she always played music, and beach sounds that I just loved. And by the time I came out, I just had a rush of ideas. But yeah,
that was a contemplative space. I mean, you were lying there. You didn't have to do anything, so your mind was at rest to be able to explore and to put things together in new and creative ways. A lot of people don't give themselves time for that. Whether it's a tanning bed or a sauna or meditation or swimming or something, driving on a long stretch of highway. So they work real hard. Stage 1 of the creative process is preparation. And then if they don't have that second stage, which is incubation, then they don't get the inspiration to take it to the higher level. Right. So they just get stuck doing the same status quo because they can't see any new insights because they're too darn busy.
Yeah. Well, when I was going through my coaching training, And like I said, I started noticing and feeling changes and feeling better, and all this positive stuff was going on. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week while I was going through the training. So I mean, it's not like I had nothing else to do. So I was making the time. So I have all these people go, well, I'm too busy and there's too much going on, and I'm like, don't give me that. If you want something bad enough, you make the time. I mean, if you want it, you can make it happen. It just you've got to put the effort into making the time. Because trying to find time to study when you're working 80 hours a week is not the easiest thing in the world. But I still finished it in under a year. So
it's a commitment. You're absolutely right. It takes effort. And people will make a lot of excuses. I'm too busy right now.
Yeah.
Well, people are always busy, Yeah. So, I mean, that's really not a good excuse. If you really care about yourself, your life, and want to flourish, then you've got to make the time. You've got to make the commitment to yourself. I'm worth it. This is what I choose to do, and I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, I finished. There's 33 courses that I finished in that year's time. Like I said, plus working about 80 hours a week. So it was a huge commitment, but I was determined to do it. So
determination. Yeah. That could be another one of the D's. Yeah. We need.
There you go. I'll give you another D.
Okay, my next one. After detachment is involves determination. We've got to detach from the excuses that we make or from some of the things that are not important to us in order to really do what is.
Yes. A lot of busy stuff that we do in our lives that, if you really get down to the nitty-gritty, you can I don't know, you can make changes if you really want to.
And actually making changes doesn't have to be a huge leap from, nothing to all. It's not an all or nothing zero-sum game. People who run marathons don't just get up one morning and say, I'm going to run 26 miles. They work up to it. They train. Right. I used to fly airplanes when you are in a direction and you want to make a little change. I'm going, that way. Mm-hmm. West, northwest, and I make just a little change in my heading, like 5 degrees or something. Over time, I'd end up in New York. Because it over time, one small step over time multiplies. It's
exactly.
And so that if all we have to do is discover really what our passion is. Detach from things that don't matter. Just detach from one little thing, and you'll free up a little space.
With a plane too, if you make a major change in your heading, it's catastrophic, isn't it?
Oh yeah. And what happens with a plane is, you have to make these gentle maneuvers, because otherwise the plane. You can tip the thing and go into a nosedive, which is not optimal.
Exactly. So any kind of change that be reasonable about it. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a person who wants to lose weight, you don't stop eating completely. I mean, that's we must feed ourselves. But they're just little changes that incrementally over time. So part of that detachment, and the next step would be discernment, is to listen to our hearts, discover our values, and find our path, and to start looking at it. The fourth step would be direction, which is looking at little steps that we can take progressively that are going to get us there. So, for example, you took 33 courses in 1 year.
Right.
But you didn't take them all at the same time.
Right.
You had to sign up for 1 or 2 or 3 courses and take those, and then you took the next set and then on, so that it's a progressive journey. And what happens with the journey, I'm wondering if it happened with you, is that the more you get, the further you get on the journey, the more you develop momentum, a positive momentum that carries you forward.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you get to a point, and I couldn't stop. I had to finish, you know?
Yeah, right. Because, it's almost like one of those laws of thermodynamics. A body in motion tends to remain in motion, and a body at rest tends to remain at rest. So that once you take a step, the first step leads to the next step, and then the next one. And then you develop this incredible positive momentum and are energized, and you just go for it. And that's, that's direction. But again, it starts with small steps.
Right.
The Tao Te Ching, which I've written about in other books, says the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step,
Yeah,
there it is. Yeah.
You got to take the first step, though.
And the first step is actually we need to celebrate taking the first step, because that's a courageous thing to do.
It is.
Step out in a new direction. Especially if people who love us or, want to protect us from failure and say, oh, dear, don't do that, Yeah. Sometimes the people who want to protect us are actually the biggest roadblocks on the path of progress.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I say in my Learn to Love, Accept, and Respect Yourself program is, sometimes the people closest to you are afraid of seeing you make changes. They stay the way you are.
Okay, so one reason is that they really care about you and they don't want to see you fall on your face and fail. But there are other reasons too, right?
Right.
Like a person can be, threatened, by change in someone they love, because it upsets the whole system that they're part of.
Exactly.
I had a friend who she was 60 years old, and she decided that, she had stopped working. Her husband was retiring as a realtor, and she wanted to go back to school and study for the ministry and, started a personal renaissance. And, of course, they had a traditional marriage. It was years ago, and she had done all the cooking. So she had all-day Saturday classes that went until 6 p.m. And her husband said, well, why don't I take you out to dinner? Because, you won't really have time to make dinner when you get home because it'll be too late. So they did that a couple times. And then he said, well, why don't I make dinner? And fast forward by about, 2 months into the course, he realized he loved cooking. He became a gourmet cook. He'd go to these stores, buy all these exotic things, try new cookbooks and recipes, and he was having the time of his life. And he ended up having a personal renaissance in response to hers. So it was a win-win. Yes, it threatened him. Yes, it unsettled his status quo world. But they both enjoyed it. And he was really a good cook. I used to like to go to dinner over there.
That's so cool. See, getting shook up can be a good thing. So.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of times we resist change, for ourselves and for the people in our lives because it's the unknown, and fear of the unknown is a pretty primal fear. But change can be for the better. It doesn't have to destroy us when you're creative. But
that's the thing. If somebody close to you starts to make changes in their life, that makes an unknown in your life. It's like, oh no, So
yeah, exactly. And what am I going to do about that? And a lot of times people get into denial, like, oh, this can't be happening, or they try to push back and say, don't do that.
That's right.
You're going to ruin our marriage, or whatever. Sometimes even our best friends are threatened by positive changes in our lives.
Yep, sure are.
I moved up to San Francisco Bay Area from L.A. I went to UCLA in graduate school, and my friends who were still in grad school down there were in Los Angeles. I got a grant to go down to do research at one of the research libraries. And the grant, I flew down there. I rented this car, and I wanted to get a compact car, but they didn't have any, so I got this big muscle car at the same price. I thought, oh, this is fun. Drove it over to meet my friends, and I had, my professor clothes on, a suit, and they looked at me, and they gave me these dirty looks and said, well, you've changed. I'm the same person, but now I have a job. They didn't like it because somehow they were still grad students and I was not anymore, and I was in a different space, and it bothered them.
Yeah. People just don't handle. It's a shame. Well, it's just like it's so funny. I was talking to an old boyfriend one day, and we were talking. He's like, "So how are you doing?" Things were going really good, and I made the mistake of saying how good things were going. And I mean, he really was ticked off that things were going good. I said, "You can't be happy for me." And he was so mad that things were going good and he wasn't involved in any way. I'm like, I would be happy for you if things were going good for you. Obviously, things weren't, but
oh,
man,
Yeah, well, there's a certain amount of ego going on his part there.
Evidently. Yeah, things weren't going good for him, and things were going really good for me and for his ex-wife at the same time, and that was a double whammy he couldn't take. So.
Oh yeah, it's a certain male ego. I took a class with my boyfriend in college at the time, and in his field, because I thought, well, I'm an English and comparative literature major. I'll take this social science class. So I sat there and took notes, and he thought, oh, this class is boring, and he didn't even come to class half the time. I ended up getting an A in the class. He got a C, and you imagine what he thought. He put down the professor. He said, oh, well, he was such a rotten professor, no one could do well in that class, and I got an A, and oh, dear. Anyway, yes, sometimes a person's ego blocks their ability to recognize the good in, someone that they care about. And that's too bad. And we need to recognize that, though, instead of feeling bad. If we're doing really well and somebody, gives us a sour look, it has nothing to do with us. It's just that they can't handle it.
Yeah. Well, I when I heard he got remarried, I sent him a message and said, well, I can be happy for you. So, enough said. Yeah. Being happy for somebody else doesn't in any way take away from our happiness. I didn't think so either, but whatever.
There's research now by this psychologist Barbara Fredrickson. I think she's at North Carolina, and she has this book called Love 2.0, which sounds provocative.
But
it sounds like something that would be on your show.
I know.
She said that we exchange micro moments of love, and it doesn't have to be romantic love. It's just recognizing somebody else, looking them in the eyes and just wishing them well. Whether we say something or just connect with them or say congratulations, that's great. We both feel energized by that little interaction.
Right.
And she said that we evolved as a species, apparently, to do that. And we need it in order to be really healthy and whole, to recognize the good in each other.
I think a lot of times it's just showing human compassion for another person, and especially somebody that has been important to you in your life at some point. I don't get how people treat other people sometimes, but...
Yeah. Well, the thing is, giving that, showing compassion, showing caring, showing just a sense of positive connection, it doesn't have to take very long, and it is actually as good for the giver as it is for the receiver.
Yeah.
And so and positivity is contagious, so that if you feel better the rest of the day, and so does the other person. Hey, that's great.
Well, it's good to have reasons to be happy.
Yeah,
it's good to laugh. I mean, come on, people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, laughing again. That's another strength, that some people have a really good sense of humor, and people love to be around them, as long as their humor isn't mean-spirited, because it opens us up and opens us up to more joy.
Yeah, I was thinking laughing with people, not at people, is better.
laughing with, you bet. I interviewed Norman Cousins years ago at UCLA Medical Center, where he was a writer in New York. He was the editor of the Saturday Review, but he got this supposedly incurable disease, ankylosing spondylitis, it was called, and which would mean that he would lose all sense of, he wouldn't be able to move. His spine would freeze. Right. And the doctor said, there's nothing we can do. So he said, he thought that maybe humor would help. So he had all these old Groucho Marx movies come to his hospital room, and he realized that if he laughed, his pain went away, and it actually increased his vital signs. But it caused so much commotion in the hospital that they said, you'll have to leave. Everybody would come into Cousin's room, and they were all laughing. And you're not supposed to have fun in a hospital. So he checked himself into the hotel across the street where the food was better anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And he actually recovered completely from this supposedly incurable illness.
Interesting.
And with laughter, because it activated his immune system. So then the UCLA Medical Center said, we need to have him on staff to share these insights with our medical students because, again, laughter is really, really healthy. And joy is really, really healthy. And people, to segue back here, when people find their callings, they're filled with joy, which, again, is contagious and spreads more positivity to the world.
Interesting.
It's not only for ourselves when we find our calling, and love ourselves enough to commit to what brings us joy and meaning, but when we are practicing our calling, we actually share our joy with others and increase the positivity around us. So it's very altruistic. It's good for the world as well as for the individual.
Right. Okay, so now we've shared all these wonderful reasons why people should find their calling. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what keeps people from what keeps them from following their calling and living their truth? Why would they not do this? I personally can't imagine not following your calling and living your truth, but what would keep people from doing that?
Okay, well, I did not write my book about people who did not find their calling, but I think a lot of it's habit, that a lot of people get in a rut. Right. And they keep doing the same thing over and over, Monday through Friday, go to work, weekends, celebrate, and, sometimes go out drinking, and then Monday do it all over again. And the years go by, and they're stuck. And, okay, so habit. Then some of my students that I've observed will take a job. They take the first job they can get out of college. And then 20 years later, they think, I'm not happy. They have a midlife crisis. Right. Because they've been stuck in a habit. They've gotten a job. They've decided they need a new car, which they buy, and they have to make their car payments, so they have to keep the job. They then get married. They have then family members to support, so they keep the job, and they get stuck in a rut, I think. So one of it is habit and a rut. Another is lack of courage. Right. I think it's scary to some people to think of doing something different, even if it's something different good, because it unsettles their world. They've gotten themselves into a comfort zone, and when we're comfortable, we don't want to move. Right. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, like fear of the unknown. I may not be happy, but this is familiar. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about is unfamiliar. I'd rather stay where I am, even if I'm not happy. Yep. Fear of the unknown is huge. I think, though, that we can counter that by saying, look, You don't have to get up and run 26 miles tomorrow morning to do a marathon. You can take one step at a time,
right.
One little step. If you're interested, and you'd like to pursue some interest, whether it's your calling or just something that brings your life greater joy and meaning, what's one little step that you can take, one baby step that's not that threatening? Because, because otherwise they won't do anything because it's too scary. So maybe just sign up for a class at the local community center. And if you don't like it, you can quit going. It's no big deal.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's important to look at what, then there are the people in our lives, which we've talked about, who are threatened.
Right. And I give a lot of my personal examples on here, and I don't do it to toot my own horn. I don't do it for anything like that. I give it to help the listeners to understand I'm not just throwing ideas out there. I'm doing this because I'm living this. I'm doing that to share that, I've done the hard work, and I'm not just throwing things out there just because I think it sounds good. I've actually done. I'm sharing things that I've done because I know it works. And 99.9% of the guests I bring on, they've done the hard work, and they know it works. So we're sharing our personal stories and saying, you know what, I've been where a lot of the listeners are right now, and I really, really want to help you. If you want to make a change and you're to the point where you want to see something and you want to do something different, this is an example of something I know works. And if you want to make a change, this is something that will do it for you. That's what we're trying to share.
You bet. And if people are interested in just sort of beginning this process, they can take a free survey, which I'm not selling this. This is developed by positive psychologists. It's called the Via Strength Survey, and it's at www.v as in Victor, IA, and character, via character, all one word, .org. And what this is there are 24 character strengths that are supposedly common to all humanity. The positive psychologists took years to do the research on this with all the different cultures of the world, reading back through history and looking at, some of the earliest historical texts and artifacts. And you'd find out, you take this little survey, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and it's free, and you can find out what your top 5 strengths are. And studies have shown that just using those strengths on a regular basis will bring our lives greater happiness and vitality, and we'll begin to find greater meaning. So that's one little step, which doesn't cost anything and which doesn't even take very long. And it's part of learning to know who we are, which I think is part of the point of living on this planet, is to know who we are and to know what we can give to others.
Very true. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to include that link on the page with all the information about the show. And what I'm also going to do on there is include your links to your websites for people so they can get more information about you. And, of course, a link where they can get a copy of your book, because the book has much, much more information and would help people that want more information if they want to even take the first couple of steps to learn more about what their calling in their life might be. How about that?
Sounds great, yes.
Because I've taken a look at just the introduction of the book, and I just think it is incredibly fascinating. So I think I know what my calling is, but I still want to take a look.
I think as long as we're alive, we're in discovery, and that's
Definitely.
Part of the joy of living.
Definitely. Well, like I said, I think people should take a look at this. Even like I said, even if you're happy, I think you should take a look and just kind of, even if you're just kind of a little bit restless, just take a look, because there's cool stuff in here. I am very happy we got to talk about all this today. So I am glad you came back, and anytime you want to come back and talk about something else, you just let me know.
Thank you. It has been a great pleasure, as always, to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, listeners, I hope that you had a very good time and got good information out of this. And if you want to listen again, or if you'd like to share it with friends of yours, or get the links for any of the information, including the character test to see what your strength is, which I'm going to go do right now, and see what mine is, you can go to my website at www.readyforloverradio.com/truecalling to get more information. And the archive will be there right after the show airs. So, Diane, thank you so much for being with me today. And listeners, I'll be with you next time on Ready for Love Radio.